Hello and welcome to this course. Today we're going to dive into scanning, a core concept that's used to discover hidden dangers in networks and systems. Now, in cybersecurity, scanning refers to the process of searching through a system, network, or application to find weaknesses or vulnerabilities. These weaknesses could be potential entry points for malicious hackers. Now, let's break this down and see why scanning is such a crucial part of protecting systems, especially in penetration testing and vulnerability assessment. Well, imagine that you're a detective, trying to uncover the clues that lead to vulnerabilities. Scanning is one of your most powerful tools in this investigation. But as with any powerful tool, it must be used ethically and responsibly. For this course, I do advise you that you have some basic pen testing knowledge, but it is not necessary. Now, simply just knowing about the 5 penetration testing phases is enough, and in this course, we will be diving deep into the scanning phase of a penetration test. This includes network and device scanning, operating system scanning, vulnerability scanning, web application scanning, and we will showcase all the common and useful tools that you can use to perform these various types of scans. So, at its core, we can say that scanning is all about finding vulnerabilities before the bad guys do. It's like checking for cracks in a building's foundation before it collapses. Besides just finding vulnerabilities, scans are important in cybersecurity for identifying vulnerabilities, ensuring compliance with regulations, monitoring network traffic for anomalies, patch management, and evaluating the effectiveness of certain security measures. Now, as we already mentioned, there are various ways to scan, depending on what you're looking for, be it open ports, unpatched software, misconfigurations, or outdated systems. As a cybersecurity professional, your goal is to identify and fix these vulnerabilities before they are exploited. And scanning is pretty much what discovers these types of vulnerabilities. Okay, now at its core, scanning can be broken down into 2 major types: port scanning and vulnerability scanning. And let's dive into port scanning first, which is one of the fundamentals and crucial aspects of any cybersecurity assessment. Why is port scanning so crucial? Well, a port scan is like knocking on doors to check if they're open. In the context of networks, ports are like doors that let data in and out of a system. Every service running on a machine or network listens on a specific port. If an attacker can identify open ports, they can figure out which services are running, and they can potentially exploit weaknesses in those services. There are various types of port scans. We have TCP Connect scan, which is the simplest form of port scanning, where the scanner tries to complete the 3-way handshake of a TCP connection with the target system on each port. If the TCP 3-way handshake is successful, the port is open. Now we will talk more about these types of scans and their details later, but now we're just going to mention them. We have the SYN scan, or the half-open scan, or often called a stealth scan. We will talk about that one as well through the course. We have UDP scans, we have other types of stealth scans or idle scans, and we have service version scans. Now these are just some of the main ones. And if you don't understand some types of scans that I just mentioned right here, don't worry. We will cover all of that in the course. Now, in penetration testing and vulnerability assessment, port scanning serves as the first step in mapping out a target attack surface. And the reason that it's the first step and that it's so important is because port scanning helps us identify, as we already mentioned, open ports and services. It allows us to map out the attack surface, so once you're done with the scans, you can map out your attack surface and plan your exploits and gaining access to the target accordingly. And as we already mentioned, it can also detect misconfigurations. Sometimes ports that should be closed are left open by mistake, or the wrong services are running. This is part of misconfigurations. Now you might be asking, well, what's the difference between the port scan and the vulnerability scan? Well, vulnerability scan is just an extended version of port scan. First you perform the port scan, then you perform the service detection, then you check whether the versions of those services are vulnerable to any types of the attacks, and if they are, well, you pretty much completed the vulnerability scan. You found the vulnerability through scanning methods. Now, there are tools that we will cover that automate this entire process, so don't worry, all of this will be covered in the course. But before we finish off this introduction lecture, let's just talk about ethical and legal considerations in scanning. Well, there are three things that we should keep an eye on: authorization, the importance of written agreements, and the impact on target systems. Now, scanning any network or system without permission is illegal and unethical. Think of it like breaking into someone's house. In the cybersecurity world, it's called hacking, and it's a serious crime. Now, when it comes to written agreements, penetration tests and vulnerability scans must always be carried out with clear written consent from the system owner. This ensures that you're authorized to test and scan their systems and have a clear scope of what you are allowed to scan. Unauthorized scanning can result in legal consequences, including fines or even jail time. And the last thing that we should keep an eye on is impact on target systems. Now, scanning, especially aggressive port scanning, can disrupt system performance. For example, a denial of service can occur when too many scan requests overwhelm a target. Always inform stakeholders about the potential risks before running scans. Alright, so that would be about it for the introduction. Now, let me introduce myself as well. My name is Aleksa Tamburkovsky. I'm the lead penetration tester from Bedem Security, and I will be guiding you through this course where at the end you are expected to master the art of scanning, and you can use all the techniques that you learned in your future penetration tests and vulnerability assessments. Alright, thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next lecture where we will start off with network scanning. Alright, let's start with the fundamentals first. So we want to understand network topologies. Now, network topology refers to the arrangement of various elements such as computers, routers, and switches, and the way that they are connected. It can be compared to, let's say, a map of a city. So understanding the layout helps you plan your route, whether you're walking or driving. Same thing in a network. So some of the common network topologies are bus topology. Now, this is a bus topology where all devices are connected to a single central cable. We also have star topology, where devices are connected to a central hub or a switch. Besides star topology, we have mesh topology. Each device is connected to every other device. Now, this is often seen in more complex systems. And lastly, we have hybrid topology, which is a mix of two or more topologies. Now, since this is not a networking course, we just need to briefly be introduced to all these four. And just know that they exist. It will be helpful whether you're performing network scans or whether you're working as a network administrator later on. But why does topology matter for scanning specifically? Well, imagine trying to scan a network without knowing how the devices are connected. The efficiency of your scan depends heavily on this layout. If you know how devices are connected and which paths data flows, you can then prioritize your scanning methods and tools. For example, a star topology might need different approaches compared to a mesh or hybrid topology. But enough about topology. Now let us dive into network scanning techniques. Essentially, network scanning will help us map out devices, services, and vulnerabilities within a network. There are different types of scans that you can perform, and these include ping sweep, which is a scan that identifies which devices on a network are alive. It's like knocking on doors to see who's home. We have regular port scanning. Now, this type of scan checks which ports on a device are open and potentially vulnerable. Ports are the gateway through which data flows in and out of a device, and attackers often target these entry points. We have service scanning. So, after identifying open ports, A server scan determines which services are running on those open ports. This helps identify software versions and potential vulnerabilities associated with those software versions. Now we also have operating system scanning or operating system fingerprinting. This technique, as it says, tries to guess the operating system of a device based on responses to certain network probes. It's like trying to tell whether someone's using Windows, Linux, or Mac OS by their network behavior. And lastly, vulnerability scanning. This takes it a step further by automatically identifying known vulnerabilities associated with specific devices or services. It helps administrators prioritize patches and fixes. Now, as I mentioned, we will finish off this lecture by talking about tools that are used for network scanning. The tools are Nmap and Masscan. Now, Nmap is one of the most popular and versatile network scanning tools available. Whether you're an experienced sysadmin or a cybersecurity professional, Nmap will be your go-to tool for detailed network exploration. And yes, you will use this tool a lot. Now, Nmap can do a variety of scans. Some examples would include simple host discovery, port scanning, service version detection, OS detection, and it also has script scanning. Now, script scanning is simply just Nmap using its own scripting engine, which will allow you to automate tasks like vulnerability scanning or, for example, brute forcing login credentials. Now, an important feature of Nmap would be its flexibility. You can perform basic scans or fine-tune them for highly targeted network investigations. Now, Masscan, on the other hand, is designed for speed, and it can scan millions of IP addresses in just a few minutes. Masscan works similarly to Nmap, but it's optimized for speed. It uses a SYN-scan approach, which is the same method that is used in many denial-of-service attacks, which makes it incredibly fast even for massive networks. Now, because Masscan is so fast, it's typically used to map large networks quickly before diving into more specific detailed tools and scans with Nmap. Alright, so that would be a brief introduction into network scanning. We covered network topologies, briefly mentioned which exists. We also mentioned why network scanning is important, and we mentioned the tools that we will use to perform basic network scans. So now that we got this out of the way, let us move on to the next lectures in this section where we will dive deep into these tools. See you there. Hello and welcome back. This is our first practical lecture of our scanning course. Now, in this course, we will be using Kali Linux virtual machine to demonstrate various different tools that we will use for scanning. And the first tool that we will cover is Nmap. Now, for those of you who have experience in ethical hacking, which I assume would be most of you, you're already introduced to both Kali Linux and Nmap. But for those of you who have never heard of Nmap as a tool, or perhaps never even used Kali Linux before, I will leave some resources so you can follow along and perhaps install your own Kali Linux virtual machine and take a look at some basic Nmap usage. However, the basic Nmap usage we're going to quickly go over in this lecture, but before we get to actually running the commands, let us first mention what exactly is Nmap for those of you who don't know. Well, Nmap is short for Network Mapper, and it's a powerful open source tool which is used for network discovery and security auditing. It can be used to scan and detect hosts, services, operating systems, and vulnerabilities on a network. It is widely used by network administrators, system administrators, and of course, penetration testers. So, what you want to remember, its key features, which are host discovery, port scanning, version detection, operating system detection, and Nmap has a very cool thing which you can use, which is scripting engine. And it is used to run scripts which help automate more advanced tasks or scans. Alright, so to run the basic Nmap command, what you want to do is you want to open terminal and you want to type Nmap in the terminal, and then after Nmap comes the options and then the target. For first scan, we're not going to be using any options and we're just going to scan the target, which we can use the website nmap.org. They allow us to scan their own website, but make sure that you're not running a bunch of scans on this website, just scan it occasionally. And for this course, we're going to be scanning various targets. One of them will be this website with basic scans. I'm also going to be scanning my own router and network devices, and I'm also running a Metasploitable 3 Windows virtual machine right here, which I will also use to scan. Now, I will also leave the link for you where you can download Metasploitable 3 Windows virtual machine. So let's start with their website first. Let's press enter. And keep in mind, once you run a network scan, now it's trying to determine which ports are open on the target website and which ports are closed. That is the usage of this basic scan right here. So once it's done, and we can check the percentage of the scan by pressing the upper arrow key, it will give us what percentage of the scan is currently done, which is 81%. And once it fully finishes, we should get output of all the open ports that Nmap tool managed to find on this website. And here it is. We got 5 ports as a result. Now, we also got some closed ports, which you will get occasionally, but what you want to shift your focus on are the open ports. So it will be outputted in this format with a basic scan. We get the port 22, which is TCP. Already we know by that it's most likely running SSH, but even if we don't know, Nmap will give us the service which is running on that port right next to the port. Port 80 and 443 are for HTTP and HTTPS. That is what we already know, and these are the open ports on this website. Now later throughout the course, we will notice that this output might not be that accurate, and what I mean by that is this might not be all of the ports that are open. There might be other ports which are also open, which were not outputted by this scan. Now, I will explain that later, but for now on, this is the basic scan result. Now, here, where we inputted our target, target can pretty much be anything. And by anything, I mean it can be a domain, which we use right here. It can be an IP address, or it can be a subnet. So you can specify any of those 3, and Nmap will recognize that and scan it accordingly. Now, since this is a basic scan, that must mean that there are other types of scans, right? Well, we can check out the basic help menu by typing nmap-h. And if I press enter, oops, we are missing -h, so here it is. We will get this help menu, which will explain most of the options that Nmap offers to us. And just by scrolling, you can notice that there are quite a few options and quite a few scans. We're going to go through most of these, which are important, especially for the penetration testing and vulnerability discovery. And we are going to explain each and every one of them, but more about that later. Now, I do advise you that you do read and go through this help menu just to introduce yourselves to various different options, and later we are going to run them. But for now, let us start off with some of the most common types of scans which you will encounter. The first one is ping scan or host discovery scan, and you can run it like this: nmap-sn, and then you type in the IP address. For example, for this scenario, I'm going to be using my IP address of my router. Now, you can use whichever IP address you want of the device that you own, so make sure to only scan the device that you have permission to scan. You shouldn't be scanning devices or websites which you do not have permission to scan. Now, to be able to scan the devices that are not a virtual machine and that are inside of your local network, make sure that in VirtualBox, if VirtualBox is what you use for virtualization, you do have your Kali Linux machine over bridged adapter. So NAT network will not work because you will not be able to reach the devices within your network unless they are a virtual machine. If bridged adapter does not work for you, then use NAT network, but then you can only scan other virtual machines that you create. So for example, if you create Metasploitable 3, you will be able to scan it with the NAT network as well. You just go, type in the IP address, and here is the IP address of my Metasploitable, and then you can scan that IP address. Now, of course, it will not be the same for you, but you just check the IP address of your target machine and use it inside of your Nmap. For me, for my router, it is this IP address. Alright, so what does host discovery scan do? This scan will determine whether a host is up by sending ICMP echo requests or ping requests to the target. So if I press enter, it shouldn't take too long before we get the result. And here it is. So it's quite a short output. And here is the scan result. One IP address, since that is how many IP addresses we scanned, is up. So our host is currently up and running. How cool is that? Now, if I try to scan a random IP address, which I don't believe is active in the network, we get 0 hosts up because this is not an active IP address. Alright? Now, another scan which you will encounter is TCP connect scan. This is one of the most common types of scans, or most common basic scan of Nmap, and you can run it like this. Nmap-st, and now let me scan Metasploitable. So in my case, the IP address of my Metasploitable virtual machine is this one, and this is option that we want to input for TCP connect scan. Now this scan is the most basic form of port scanning. What it simply does, it establishes a full TCP connection with the target port. Now keep in mind that this scan, for the security purposes, is simple, but it can be detected easily, right? So let's press enter. And let's wait for the result. Once again, it shouldn't take too long because this virtual machine is in my local network, and here it is. Now we notice that Metasploitable has a bunch of open ports, which could be used to figure out whether any of these services right here is vulnerable to any specific attacks. And later in the course, we will actually look at that. But for now on, these are the results of TCP connect scan. Now, another popular scan which you will encounter is synscan. This scan is typed like this. So instead of -st, you just use -ss. And this is one of the most popular ones and most stealthy scan methods. Why is that? Well, it sends just SYN packets to open ports, but it never completes the TCP handshake. This makes it much harder to detect compared to the previous scan, which establishes a full TCP three-way handshake and makes a full connection. This one will just send a SYN packet and nothing else. That's why it's harder to detect. But other than that, it should provide us with same results as the previous scan. Okay, now the next scan, which is quite useful and I use it a lot, is the service version detection scan. So notice the output of the current scan and the previous scan. It gives the port, it gives the state of the port and the service that is running on that port. But the service detection scan will attempt to determine the exact version of the services that are running on open ports by probing them with specific application protocols. So we will get additional column right here, which will try to perhaps determine which service or which version of FTP is running on this port. Let's give it a try. To run that scan, you type nmap-sb, and let me scan my Metasploitable machine once again, press enter. Now, since this will go even deeper with the scan, keep in mind that it might take a little bit longer than other scans, but since this is still in my local network, it shouldn't take too long to finish. So let's just wait for that. And remember once again that to determine at what percentage the scan is at, you can type upper arrow in the terminal, and it's currently at 52.63%, so halfway done. Let's wait for it to finish. And here it is. We get quite some output back, right? It took quite longer than other scans and we get a bunch of results back. And here is the extra column which I mentioned, the version column. It gives the exact version of the service which are running on these open ports. For example, FTP is Microsoft FTPD. We got Microsoft Windows Server running, and we get other versions for other services. We get Oracle Glassfish, Java Message Service, Sun Glassfish, Open Source Edition 4.0. And what you would do next with these results is you would try to search for each and every one of these versions, whether they are vulnerable to any type of the attack. Now, if they are an outdated version, they're most likely vulnerable to certain attacks. Now, you might wonder, well, what's down here? What is this? Well, sometimes Nmap cannot exactly determine which version or which service is running on an open port, and it will give you the fingerprint of that service so you can research it more. It says right here, 2 services unrecognized despite returning data, and it will give you the server's fingerprint. We get which port is it, it's 8181, and it is this open port right here from the result, and the other service is port 9200, and we also get its fingerprint, right? Okay, awesome. Now, few more things that I want to mention throughout this lecture, and then we will finish off with the basics of Nmap, and those things are scanning specific ports. Maybe you don't want to scan the entire port range. Maybe you want to scan a single port, 2 ports or 3 ports. It doesn't matter. Or you want to scan a range of 5 or 6 ports. Now, Nmap allows you to do exactly that. So to specify which ports you want to scan, you can type nmap-p, and for example, 80 is the port that we want to scan, and then 443. So we separate the ports by comma, and let's say that I want to scan my router, which in my case is 192.168.1.1. In your case, it might be a different IP address once again, but in my case, it's this one, and this command specifies that I want to scan port 80 and port 443, which are HTTP and HTTPS ports on my router. And if I press enter, it will only end up scanning those 2 ports, right? And here it is. We get the results for only those 2 ports. Now remember at the start of the lecture when we ran our basic command, which was just scanning my router at all, perhaps with stscan, it doesn't matter. So I'm scanning my router with stscan, and it will give this result back. But remember when I told you that this might not be the entire result. So there might be other ports which are still open. Well, that is because Nmap by default will scan the top 1000 most common ports on the target. And there are over 65,000 ports on each device. So there are lots of ports which are not scanned at all. They are less common ports to be used, but they're not scanned at all. So how can we scan them? Well, Nmap provides a simple command which is -p-. So -p is used for specifying ports, but once you specify -p-, that means that you're scanning all 65,000 ports on that device. And if I press enter, you can already assume that this is going to be a longer scan than previous scans because we're scanning much more ports, but once it finishes, it should output all the ports and their results. And here it is. So here are all the open ports which it managed to find. And it will give you here that it scanned 65,528 closed ports, and here are 7 open ports. So that ends up 65,535 ports. And it finished quite fast. We got the results for my router. Now, once again, if you're scanning your router or if you're scanning Metasploitable, the results might differ for your router. However, the results for Metasploitable are going to be the same as for me. So if I scan Metasploitable with the same command, it will take a little longer, but you should get the same or the exact same results as I do if you're scanning Metasploitable 3 Windows virtual machine, right? Let me see the percentage of the scan, so 43% done. Let's wait for it to finish, just so you can see the result for all port scan on the Metasploitable, and you can perhaps compare it with your own results if you want to install Metasploitable and test our scans on that machine as well, as we do in this course. So here are all the results, and there are quite some ports open. You can compare, you should get exactly the same result with exactly the same ports, because we're scanning exactly the same machine, and if you do, then that's good. We can continue to the next scan. And the last one that I want to show for this lecture is the cool utility of Nmap to use its scripting engine. Now, the Nmap scripting engine allows users to automate scanning tasks and perform more advanced security checks. For example, In the next section, we're going to focus on vulnerability scanning. So to finish off this first Nmap lecture, let us finish it off with script that is used to scan for vulnerabilities, just so we can get a teaser of how vulnerability scanning works. Now, to run a script in Nmap, we use nmap -- script, and then we type the name of the script. In Nmap's case, the name of the script is vuln for scanning vulnerabilities, and then you can simply run it on, let's say, my router, or you can run it on Metasploitable, doesn't matter, on any machine which you want to scan, that you have permission to scan, and press enter. It will run vulnerability related scripts on this target machine and determine whether it managed to find any of the vulnerabilities from those scripts. These are also longer scans to finish because they're running a bunch of scripts and not just scanning for open ports, so make sure to stick till the end. And here it is. It took quite some time to finish, as you can see down here, almost 3 minutes, and here are the results of all the scripts or all the vulnerability scripts that Nmap ran on this target machine. So down here you will see the results. Whenever you have this dash, you will get the script name and you will get the results of that script. So in this case, the script execution failed, but in other cases, for example, in this one, it was trying to find cross-site scripting injection, but it couldn't find any DOM-based XSS. On other, we can check right here that it gives SSL poodle. It might be vulnerable, as we see right here. Once it's vulnerable, you want to research into that specific vulnerability and check, because sometimes it might be a false positive, so it's not really 100% that it's vulnerable, but of course that is something you want to look into. And here is the description of the vulnerability that my router is potentially vulnerable to. It's called SSL poodle, right? And that would pretty much be about it for this introduction lecture to Nmap. Those are some of the basic usages of Nmap. Now, of course, we only touched the tip of the iceberg here. There are a bunch of other scripts, bunch of other commands, bunch of other scan options which you can use. And here is a pro tip for Nmap. You want to read Nmap manual. That is how you will get to learn all of its options. And you might be wondering, well, how can I access the Nmap manual? Where can I read about it? Well, it's simple. In terminal, just type man and then Nmap. And it will open the complete Nmap manual with all of its options and detailed explanation of each and every option. If you scroll down here, let's find, for example, some type of scan which we used, and let's see. So no ping. Let's, for example, try to find TCP connect scan. Here it is. TCP connect scan and TCP syn scan. These are both scans that we ran, and you can read more about them right here. If there is any other specific scan that you want to run, you can simply just scroll until you find that option, and then, for example, let's say you want to run TCP ACK scan, you can read exactly how it works and when it is used, right? Most of these options we're going to look by the end of the course. For now, we're only introduced to the simple and basic usage of Nmap, and in the future lectures, we're going to touch on more advanced things such as firewall evasion, perhaps operating system discovery, and many other options as well. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next lecture where we're going to use an alternative tool to Nmap, which is called mass scan. See you in the next lecture. Welcome back. In the last lecture, we took a look at the basic usage of a scanning tool called Nmap. And now it's time that we take a look at the alternative tool that we can use for scanning networks. In this lecture, we will cover mass-scan. Now, what is mass-scan? Well, mass-scan is an incredibly fast and highly efficient network scanner which is capable of scanning the entire internet in just a few minutes. It has a high speed, so it's able to scan millions of IP addresses per second, and it's mostly used to scan larger networks in a fraction of time compared to other tools like Nmap, which would take quite longer to scan. Now, mass-scan is not installed on all operating systems. We do have it installed in Cal Linux, but if you're using Windows or any other Linux distro, there are different ways that you can install it. So to install it, first of all, you can type sudo apt update, which will run the regular apt update command. And if it's not installed, then this command sudo apt install masscan should install it. But on Kali Linux, it should come by default, so there is no need for this. If you're using macOS, however, you can install it with the homebrew command by typing brew install masscan, and if you're using Windows, well, then you can simply just download it from the repository on GitHub, right? Okay, so now that we know that, in order to open the masscan help menu, you can type masscan and press enter. And the first thing that you might notice is that this help menu is way smaller than the one that we get from running Nmap help menu. But remember from the last lecture, I taught you that you should always read the manual page instead of the help menu because it provides much more details. So does masscan have manual page? Well, let's check. Mass or man, and then we type the tool name, which is masscan, and it does have a manual page. So here you can read all the possible options that you can use with masscan, right? But we're not going to be doing that. Right now, we're only going to take a look at the basic options. So what is this tool syntax? Well, the syntax is masscan and then the target. So in this case, I'm going to start with my router. You can start with Metasploitable 3 or any other machine that you want. And then you can provide it with -p option, which will scan a list of ports that you provided to. Now, the ports have to be comma separated. So for example, like this, and then 443. So let's say these are the two ports that we want to scan. And what this will do is it will scan a single target, in this case, my router, for the specified ports, right? So if I press enter, it will give us permission denied error, which means that we need to run the tool with sudo permission. So let's do that. And here it is. So it says discover the open port on this target, so both ports are open, right? But masscan is not really used for this. If you were to scan one target for only 2 ports, you would most likely use Nmap instead of masscan. But if you want to scan, for example, an entire IP range, well, then masscan could be useful. So let's give it a try. How can we scan an entire range? Well, we simply use the same command, and instead of a single IP address, we provide a subnet. So this is my network subnet. In your case, if you have different local network range, the subnet will be different. So don't just copy the same exact subnet. Check what subnet you're running on and then scan that subnet in your home network. Of course, if you have permission to scan. So what this will do, it will scan all IP addresses in my local network from 1 to 255. It will check which ones have port 80 and port 443 open. So let's press enter on this. And it's already over. It scanned 255 hosts. Now, most of those hosts were down, so that's why it finished this fast. But it did manage to find an additional IP address with port 80 open. And I can only assume that that might be the Metasploitable 3 machine. So let me just give it a check. I will type ipconfig. And indeed, it is Metasploitable 3 virtual machine that has port 80 open, because we can see the matching IP addresses .1.9 and .1.9 right here. Okay, cool. But this is something that we can do with Nmap as well, right? Well, I already told you that you can scan an entire internet with high speed by using masscan. So this is not really useful for practical purposes, but it is cool to show. So let me just show you. You can type masscan and then 0.0.0.0/0, and then let's say we're searching for the same ports, which are port 80 and port 443, and we will add an additional option of rate, which we will set to 1 million. So remember, 6 zeros. And what this rate option does is it will send the specified amount of packets per second to speed up the scan. Now, if you go too high or too low, you might get imbalance, since if you provide it with a higher speed, it will be less accurate and vice versa. So if I press enter, so we get a hint and we get an error. First of all, let me just try to run this with sudo. And if it doesn't work, then we will just use the exclude additional option, and I will press enter. So we do need to use exclude. Let us just add it, exclude 255.255.255.255, and let's press enter. And here it is. It's scanning multiple IP addresses. So all public IP addresses will be scanned. Now, of course, this will take a lot of time, as we can see right here that it's only 0.00% done. And the higher the rate limit, the faster it will go, but it will be less accurate. So you can even provide a lower rate limit, but that is something that will take much longer time. As we can see right here, it's also taking a long time with using rate limit of 1 million. And we can see how much time it has remaining to scan the entire internet. How cool is that? Now, of course, we're not going to be leaving this to finish. It's only 0.01% done, so you can imagine this will take quite a long time. So I will just stop it. But we already did get some results right here. We got a couple of IP addresses that have port 443 and port 80 open. Now, MassScan also has some advanced options, or some more advanced options if you want to play with them. So let's say I'm trying to scan my subnet -24, and I'm using -P1 and then -1024. So this will scan ports from 1 to 1024 for entire subnet. Once again, this requires sudo. Wait, let me find the command which I ran, and I need to add sudo to it for it to work. And once again, it's going to scan entire subnet for any open port between 1 and 1024. But we are not interested in the results here. I just want to show you all the possible options. Now, of course, you can also add the exclude command, which we just saw previously, in case you don't want to scan a certain IP address. Perhaps that certain IP address you found out to be a honeypot, and you don't want to scan it, so you don't trigger any security alarms. You can exclude it with this command, and let's say I don't want to scan my router. It will scan all IP addresses in my subnet except my router. Alright, so that should be easily understandable. Now, of course, you can speed up the regular scans as well. You do not need to use the rate limit on scanning the entire internet. You can simply just run this command and use --rate and then let's say 5000. You can already notice that the scan is going faster than previously, which only came to 0.43%. This one will finish faster, right? If you add even more rate, so let's say 50,000, here it is. We already discovered one open port, which we didn't discover right here, so it's going faster. It doesn't show right here that it is faster, but you can notice by the results that we're getting them much sooner than we did in the previous scan. And here are all the results. Now, we are most likely going to get only the metasploitable results right here, which we can confirm by only seeing the 192.168.1.9 IP address, which is my metasploitables IP address. And these are the open ports in the first 1000 ports of Metasploitable 3. You should get similar results, or not similar, but you should get same results for the Metasploitable 3 if you're scanning it as well. Now, the next thing that I want to show you is the output format. So someone might ask you for the results of the scan. You want to output them accordingly. There are various different types of outputs which you can use, which is a standard output, which we saw right here. This is a terminal output. And we have JSON output. So for example, you can use dash, and let's say that we use a simpler scan, so we don't have to wait for this one to finish. Let's just use scanning my router for port 80 and 443, and you can use dash OJ with capital J and then the file name, so result.json, for example. This should finish the scan and it should save the results in JSON format. Right, so if I type ls, here it is, result.json, we can cat it just in case, and we get the JSON format of the results of scanning my router's IP address for these two ports. Now, JSON is not the only possible format that you can have. You can also have this command, so result.xml, if you want to save in XML, but then you need to change the option from J to O capital X, and this should do exactly the same. It should just save it in XML output. Now you would choose your desired output based on compatibility with other tools that you might use, or compatibility with the report that you want to provide to the client. And if I type ls, now we should see two results, results.json and result.xml. And let's check XML. So it should be in XML format, right? Okay. And the last thing that I want to just talk about and mention, but we will talk about it later in the course, is avoiding firewall detection. Now we will mostly cover avoiding firewall detection with Nmap, but masscan can also be used to avoid firewall detection a little bit. So it can use asynchronous scanning, which can bypass simple firewalls. The rate option, which we already saw right here, can also be used to bypass firewalls. And you might be asking, well, how it can do that? Well, if you adjust the scan rate and timing options, you might be able to reduce the packet signatures. And if you lower the rate, then maybe it will not trigger the firewall. Now you can also use options like --source--port to avoid blocking. But masscan is not that good for avoiding firewall. Nmap has more options to do so, and we will see those options later in the course, once we get to advanced usage of Nmap. Okay, so that would pretty much be about it. Once again, if you want to read more about masscan, make sure to open the manual with the man masscan command and read through all the possible options that you're interested in if you want to use this tool for your scans. Okay, awesome. That will be about it for this lecture. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Welcome back. Let's talk about vulnerability scanning. Now, in the last section, we took a look at the basic types of scans with using tools like Nmap or masscan. But now, let us take a look at other tools which are specifically designed to perform vulnerability scanning. Now, remember, vulnerability scanning is just a step after regular scanning. So once you discover services and versions of services that are running on a target machine, then you want to perform vulnerability scan to determine whether there is any vulnerability on those services. And there are tools that will automate that, and we will show them in this section. The first one that I want to talk about is Nessus. Now, Nessus is a tool that we need to download first, so it does not come pre-installed, and it has a paid tier and a free tier. The free tier will allow you to scan up to 16 IP addresses, and after that you will have to pay for future scans, but we're going to show the free version in this lecture. So the first thing is to open up your Firefox, right? Type in Nessus Essentials, download, and right here, Tenable Nessus Essentials Vulnerability Scanner. Click on that, and it will ask you for your first name, last name, and email. You want to fill this in, and you can read right here that Nessus Essentials is a free product from Tenable that provides high-speed, in-depth vulnerability scanning for up to 16 IP addresses. So let's type in. I will type in my first name, last name, and then the email address that you want to use. Click on Get Started. It will say thank you for registering for Nessus Essentials, and then you can download the Nessus tool. Now, here you want to choose these settings. Now, under the version, there is only this one specific available. You want to select it, and under the platform, if you're on Kali Linux, you can simply just proceed with the specified platform right here. You do not need to change anything. But if you're on a different platform, then you want to find your operating system under the platform tab. Once you select that, click on download, click on I agree, and it will start downloading right here. So for Kali Linux, you should have .deb as a package that you downloaded, And the next step is to open your terminal, navigate to the downloads directory, and you should see the package downloaded in the downloads directory, right? To install this package, we want to run this command, sudo dpkg-i, and then the Nessus version. Type this in, press enter, type in your sudo password, and press enter. Now, it gives us a command right here, or it gives us a notification that we can start Nessus scanner by typing this command. So let's start it. First, copy this, click paste. It will ask for password once again, type it in. And Nessus should be started. Now, another command that you can use to start Nessus is simply just sudo systemctl start nessusd. And this one should work as well. Now, to check whether it's indeed working, instead of using this command and start, simply just type status. And let us see, it says active and running, so that is good. And all you want to do right now is navigate in your Firefox to this link, which is localhost and then port 8834. Press enter. And let me just double check whether that is the exact. Okay, so it's this link. Let's copy it. Copy selection. Paste the link and go. Now it will give you a warning that it is not secure page. You just want to click on advanced and click on accept, risk and continue. And it will open the Nessus installation page. Here you want to click on continue. You want to start a trial of Nessus Essentials, and here it is, register for Nessus Essentials, which is the free version. Click on that. If you already have activation code, which you should have received once signing up on their website, you should click on skip and it will ask you for that activation code. Now, if you don't have, just click on back, type the first and last name, your email address, and click on register. I will click on skip because I already have my activation code and I will type it in. Once you type activation code, click on continue. And the next step that you should see is the username and password. You can type whatever you want. You can either save it or not save it, it's up to you. And now Nessus will actually start downloading. Now keep in mind, this might take some time to finish. It will first download the plugins and then it will install the plugins. So this can take even up to 1 hour. Not necessarily the download process, but the installation process that comes after will take some time. So let us just wait for this step to finish. And after a few minutes, it finished downloading. And here under the scans, you will see that the new scan is grayed out, and it will be grayed out until compiling of plugs is done, right? Now, in the meantime, you can just go grab a cup of coffee or do whatever you want. This will take some time. It might finish in 15 minutes, it might finish in an hour, but once it's done, we should be able to run a new scan. And here it is. After like half an hour, we got plugins compiled, right? And it will open this window, which will prompt you for the targets that you want to scan. But remember, you can only scan 16 hosts with the free version, so don't go too crazy with this. If you plan on testing it on some other targets that you don't have available at the moment, for now on, what I am going to do is I'm going to click on X right here and I'm going to start my Metasploitable 3 virtual machine and only scan that machine. This is because after scanning my Metasploitable 3, I will still have 15 IP addresses that I can scan. Now, if you have Metasploitable 3, feel free to use it. It is a good example for this tool because it does come with a bunch of vulnerabilities which should get detected by Nessus. And if you don't have Metasploitable 3 or if you're using some other virtual machine, feel free to go with that one as well. But just keep in mind that it won't be the same results as with this machine. Alright, So I have my Metasploitable 3 started. This is the IP address of my Metasploitable 3, 192.168.1.9. What I need to do is I need to click on New Scan, and I will have several options right here. Now, some of these options will require for me to upgrade to the professional version in order for me to use it. But for this example, what we can do is we can either go with basic network scan or advanced scan. Now, it doesn't matter. You can click on any of these scans and you can fill this in, right? So I will type Metasploitable 3, Metasploitable 3 wall scan. Now under the folder, we can select my scans, and under the target comes the IP address right here, and that would be the basic option. So under the discovery, remote host, you can check all of these options and maybe change some depending on your own needs, but there is no need for me to go through all of these options. They're very basic, they're self-explanatory, so you can go through them and see whether you want to change anything. Now for me, I'll just click on save, and I will have my scan right here, Metasploitable 3 vulnerability scan, and it didn't start yet. In order to start it, I need to click on this button which says launch. I will click on that, and here it is. Now it is running. Now, of course, once you're running a vulnerability scan, it will also take some time. So this is not something that will finish in 5 seconds, 10 seconds. It will take some time depending on the amount of targets that you're scanning and the amount of open ports and vulnerabilities that it manages to find on the target, right? So once you start the scan, you need to wait for it to finish. And once this is done, we're going to go through the results to see what Nessus managed to catch. Okay, so a few minutes have passed and we can see that it is still scanning, which is understandable. The scan is still running, but what I want to show you is that you can actually look into the results without waiting for this to finish. So you can look at the current results by clicking on the scan, and it will open this window which will tell you exactly what it managed to find by now. Now keep in mind that we can see right here it's still running, but currently it managed to find 15 critical vulnerabilities, 25 high vulnerabilities, 26 medium vulnerabilities, low vulnerabilities only 2, and we have information disclosure vulnerabilities at 90. So even while it's running, we can go to vulnerabilities and check each and every one that it managed to find. Now, of course, once you have this type of result, you want to be looking into critical vulnerabilities first. So you're not interested really in medium, low, or information vulnerabilities at the start. Now, here where we see mixed, you can click on it because mixed means that it managed to find a mixture of different severity vulnerabilities. And once you click on that, you will see 2 critical vulnerabilities which you want to check out first. If you click on them, it will give you the description of the vulnerability, the CVE of the vulnerability, and it will also give you the solution which says, in this case, upgrade to PHP version 5.3.15 or later. Now, we can see down here where it managed to find the vulnerability, support 8585 on our target machine. And if we were interested into actually fixing this vulnerability, we would read through this, we would check out the specified links, and we would provide our solution in our report to fix this vulnerability. Now, of course, before you do all of that, you would have to go a step further and actually prove that this is a critical vulnerability by exploiting it and showing to your client that you managed to exploit this vulnerability, and then you would provide them with a report fixing that vulnerability, right? Now, here you have recommendations which showcase certain actions that you can perform. Apache, multiple vulnerabilities were found, upgrade to Apache version 2.4.59 or later. Same goes for PHP, we already saw that. We got Microsoft RDP, which is remote desktop protocol. We got the BlueKeep vulnerability, which could be patched. So this target machine, which is Metasploitable 3, is vulnerable to the BlueKeep vulnerability. We have the CVE right here, and those are just some of the vulnerabilities, right? If I go back to my scans, we can see that the scan is now completed. So this would be final results. under the vulnerabilities, you would ideally go through each and every one of these, starting with, of course, mixed or critical and high vulnerabilities, and you would try to provide a solution for each vulnerability that you find. Now we can see right here that most of these vulnerabilities are actually from the Apache, so maybe just upgrading your Apache version could fix most of these vulnerabilities, which would be perfect because one solution fixes most of these, right? Okay, now that would be about it. You can notice how powerful this tool can really get, because in just a few minutes we managed to find 15 critical vulnerabilities for the target. If you want, play around with this tool. You can start a new scan with a new target and perhaps see whether you have some devices in your network that are vulnerable to certain attacks or certain vulnerabilities. Okay, awesome. Now that we showcased Nessus and how we can use Nessus to perform vulnerability scanning, in the next lecture it's time to show an alternative free tool, which is OpenVAS, which can be ran from Kali Linux to also perform vulnerability scanning. See you in the next lecture. Hello and welcome back. Let's cover OpenVAS in this lecture. Now, OpenVAS, or Open Vulnerability Assessment System, as we already mentioned, is a comprehensive open source tool that is used for vulnerability scanning and management. Now, how can we install it? Because it does not come pre-installed in Kali Linux. Well, first of all, let us type sudo apt update. Let's wait for this to finish, and then we will install OpenVAS with apt install command. Okay, so now, once it has been updated, we type sudo apt install -y OpenVAS. And let's leave it to install. Alright, awesome, it has finished. The next command that we need to run is this one, sudo gvm-setup. Now keep in mind, this command might fail. It's used to initialize the necessary components and to set up the Greenbone Vulnerability Manager or GVM and OpenVAS as well. But it might fail. Last time I tried it, it failed, but we are going to look how we can fix it in case it fails. Alright, awesome. Now it hasn't failed this time. In case it fails for you, then make sure that you try to reinstall PostgreSQL or update to a newer version of PostgreSQL. That is what worked for me last time, but it seems that on this version of Kali Linux it works without issues. Now, keep in mind that the output of this command will provide you with a username and password for GWM. So we can copy the password. And to start GVM, we can type sudo gvm-start. And right here, we notice, whoops, it scrolled back down. We notice that we have a web user interface, which will be automatically opened if you don't do anything. And it will go onto this port 9392, which is exactly the port that it opened on our local host. Let's click on advanced. And let's accept the risk and continue. Now remember that password that we copied? Well, now you want to paste it and you want to type admin as username. Click on sign in. You can either choose to save this or not save this. It's up to you. And here is the user interface of OpenVAS. Now note that OpenVAS scans are typically executed through this user interface or through this web interface, but you can also use the command line to perform the scans. In this lecture, we're going to see how we can use the web interface because it's much more friendly than using the command line. Alright, so we started our OpenVAS, we logged in, and now what we want to do is we want to create a new target. So under the configuration tab, we want to click on targets. And right here we have target 0 of 0, so we don't have anything to scan. But if you click on this icon right here that says new target, you will be prompted with this window where we can input information about our target. So let's call it once again Metasploitable 3. And we will type as common metasploitable 3 won't scan. Hosts will be 192.168.1.9 in my case, because that is once again the IP address of a metasploitable 3. We don't want to exclude any of the hosts. Here is where we choose which ports we want to scan. We want to scan all TCP ports, a live test. Let's see what we have available. Scan config default. We can leave it on default for now. Credentials for authenticated checks. Now this is where you input the credentials in case the target has SSH or SMB and you do have a password that you want to provide it with, so it can also go and perform authenticated scans. You would be inputting that right here. But we don't need that right now for metasploitable. And we will just click on save to create a new target. Now, once you create a new target, it's time to create a new scan. And to do that, you want to navigate to scans and you want to click on the same icon right here, which says new task. You want to click on new task and here it is. We can type once again metasploitable 3 vulnerability scan. Comment we do not need. Under the scan targets, you want to select the target that we just created, which is metasploitable 3. Under the alerts, there's nothing that we need to input here. We can leave all of this as it is, and under the scanner, we can either choose CVE or OpenVAS default, and you can click on save. Now here under the scan config, there should be an option prompted, but my guess is that it hasn't compiled all the plugins yet. That's why we don't have it available. Just click on save right now. And let's check this. Failed to find config. Let me just check this to CVE perhaps and click on save. Maybe that way it should work. And once you created the scan, you should see it listed right here under the tasks tab, which says tasks 101. And we can click on start, which is this button right here. Okay, now you might notice that it already finished. That is because we selected a different type of scan and we don't really want to perform this scan whatsoever. We want to perform the first one, which is not CVE. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete this one and I'm going to see whether now we can choose the scan config. So we still can't seem to choose the scan config. I'm going to give it a few minutes, maybe for the plugins to compile, and then this option should become available. After some time, the option appeared, as we can see right here. Once you create a new task again, you should see scan config as full and fast right here. It shouldn't be grayed out anymore. Now it might take 10 to 15 minutes, or if it doesn't work after 15 minutes, try restarting your OpenVAS and creating a new task again, and then you should see scan config option available. Now we're going to leave it as full and fast. As you can see right here, there are other options as well, but we're just going to leave it as this. And let's once again fill in the options. So name, metasploitable 3 vulnerability scan. Target is going to be our already created target, and everything else we're going to leave as it is. So click on save and click on run. So now it doesn't finish immediately. We can see that the status is requested and it's currently running, right? So as with Nessus, this will take some time to finish. But the difference is that where with Nessus you have only 16 free IP addresses to scan, with OpenVAS you can scan as many IP addresses as you want. Now we can see that it finished, which shouldn't be the case, but now that I think of it, it seems that metasploitable 3 machine is no longer running, so I'm just going to start it once again. This has nothing to do with the OpenVAS. This has everything to do with machine not running. So we're just going to run it again. For you, it should work if you're scanning your machine. And let me just input. And then I will log in. I need to quickly check the IP address just to make sure that it is the same, and it is. And now if I create the task again, scan target, metasploitable, save, and run, now it should work. Okay, so now it seems to be running. If I click on it, nothing really happens yet, but we can see under the status that it currently is running. And keep in mind that if the scan is too powerful, especially on vulnerable machines such as metasploitable, it might end up crashing it, which could be what happened last time we tried to run the scan. So now that it is running, we have nothing left to do but wait for this to finish, and then we can go through some results and then compare the results to the Nessus results that we got. Alright, the scan has almost finished, and you might notice, at least for me, it took much longer than the Nessus scan. But I guess that is the benefit of having an open source free vulnerability scanner versus a paid one. Nonetheless, we have 2% left, but we can still look at the results that it currently gives us. So let's click on this bar which says status, and here you will see all of the things that it found. Now you can either go like that, or you can click on the scan itself, or pardon me, you can go right here, vulnerabilities, and it will show you vulnerabilities for the scan that you just did. Now, I find personally this to be easier by clicking on the status and going one by one. So for example, under the results, we can see all of the vulnerabilities. Under the hosts are the hosts that you scanned, and so on and so on. So you can see that it ranks them by severity, and we have quite a few critical and high vulnerabilities. Now, as with the previous results from Nessus, I did mention that you should always focus on the high and critical vulnerabilities first. So what you would do, you would start from the top, click on the vulnerability, see what the vulnerability is, how can it be solved, what is the impact right here, and under that you have the solution, and you can check the references to read more about that vulnerability in case you need to provide a proof of concept that you can exploit this particular vulnerability, right? Once you do that, you would move on to the next vulnerability and do the same thing. Now, keep in mind that this might look like a lot of work, but that is only because we get bunch of vulnerabilities in the result. And the reason that we do get bunch of vulnerabilities is because we are scanning Metasploitable 3 virtual machine, which is meant to have bunch of vulnerabilities for you to practice, right? So in reality, you will not have nowhere close to this amount of vulnerabilities unless you are scanning a honeypot by accident. Then you might get this much vulnerabilities, but on real devices, it is highly unlikely that you will ever encounter this type of a result for a single machine, right? Okay, so that would be about it. Now you know how to use the OpenVAS vulnerability scanner, how to read through the results of the OpenVAS vulnerability scan, and which steps to take after you perform the vulnerability scan. Nonetheless, thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next lecture. Welcome back. So we talked about vulnerability scanning, and there are various types of vulnerability scanning, but the one that sticks out as most common type of vulnerability scanning is web application vulnerability scanning. Why is that? Well, simply because websites are everywhere and they're easily accessible. That's why they're the first layer of attack for hackers. That's why we will devote this lecture to just web application scanning tools, so you can have multiple different options when it comes to automating web application scanning. The first one, or the first tool that we will cover, is OWASP Z-Attack Proxy, or ZAP. It is a powerful open source web application security scanner which is used for both automated and manual penetration testing. It is developed by OWASP and it has several key features such as active scanning, passive scanning, spidering, session management, and so on and so on. Now we will take a look at it in just a second, but first, what you want to do is you want to perform sudo apt update as usual. And once this has finished, you want to install Java if it's not already installed. Now on Kali Linux it should already be installed, but just in case, run this command, because there are different versions that could be installed, and press Y if you get prompted with this question, and this should install this exact version of Java on your Kali Linux machine. In the meantime, we can start our Metasploitable, which is currently started for me, and we can log in into Metasploitable, or whichever machine you want to use. But keep in mind, since this is a lecture on web application scanning, you must scan a target that is hosting a website. Otherwise it will not work, because we're scanning websites, right? Okay, let me just quickly log in. And right here, the next thing is to install the zap proxy. So sudo apt install zap proxy. Type it like this and press enter. And this will start installing our tool. Now this might take a minute or two, so let's wait for this to finish. Okay, and once it's done, type zap proxy. You might want to do it with sudo, just in case, and this should start our tool. You should see this window pop up, so let's wait for it to load. And here it is. So this is our tool. Now it asks us, do you want to persist the zap session? Let's just click on the first one. Doesn't matter, shouldn't be anything important. And let's close this window. Enlarge our zap proxy tool. Right? And here it is. Now it has quite a few options, right? So it's not that simple of a tool. Now to run a regular scan on our target, you want to click on Quick Start right here. And right here you want to click on Automated Scan. Now Automated Scan will perform everything for you, so you don't have to do anything, you just sit back and wait for it to finish. And here we're specified with a few options. One of those is URL to attack, and to figure out the URL, in my case I'm going to use Metasploitable, so I need to know the IP address, which is as usual .1.9. I'm going to type it in. And here it is. This is something that we can leave as it is. Let's click on attack, and once we click on attack, you can go back right here, back to the main menu. We should already be seeing some results from the scan, right? So let's go history, alerts. It seems that it actually finished the scan already, which shouldn't be the case. So let's see why that happened. If we go back to the quick start and automated scan, let's try to scan once again. And it does indeed scan it quite fast. So I would personally expect more vulnerabilities from Metasploitable 3. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to scan the router instead to see if it will still finish that fast. Fail to start to connect, this is okay. And now it will start running the scan. This one takes quite longer, so it seems that there is an either issue with Metasploitable 3, or we need to specify the exact path that we want to scan, which we will see later. But for now on, it's important that our tool works. I'm currently scanning my router and it's going over different vulnerabilities. Now this is the active scan taking place. You can see all the requests that are being sent to the router, or in your case to your target, whichever target you choose to scan. This is the percentage of the scan. Under the alerts, you can see what it has managed to discover. Now keep in mind that you shouldn't really run two targets at once, because as we can see right here, we get the output for both Metasploitable and my router, so it can get confused. You can see which target it is by checking the IP address which you provided. In this case, the SQL injection might be inside of the router, and we can see that later. Now it also shows you which type of request it made. So this is the SQL injection that it tried on this post request. And one thing that is important is to notice this confidence tab, right? So just because it says SQL injection, if you notice the confidence says medium, and if you were to try this, it might or might not work. So this is not 100% correct. It might not be an SQL injection in real world. This might just be a false positive, right? So you want to check all of this. Currently, we have 3 different post requests that triggered this SQL injection, and both are set to confidence medium, which means they might or might not be an actual injection. And this is something that we would want to check after the scan has finished. Now, down here, this is also on the router, vulnerable JS or vulnerable JavaScript library, confidence once again medium, and under the description we can read that the identified library jQuery validation version, this one is vulnerable. And it does refer you to other CVEs that have anything to do with this vulnerability. Alright, so under the active scan, we can see that it has finished. If you want, you can go through all of these requests to see what Zap proxy sent to the target. And under the alerts, go through all of these vulnerabilities, once again starting from the red flags, going to orange, yellow, and blue, because red flags are high and critical vulnerabilities. Orange is, I think, just high or medium. Yeah, it's medium. Yellow is low vulnerability, and this is just informational or information disclosure, right? Okay, so that is how you use Zap proxy to scan. If you want, you can scan any website that you have possession of or that you have permission to scan, and then you can generate a nice report from the alerts tab. Just make sure that you remove the false positives from the report, because once again, this is automated scan. It's not that it will be 100% correct. There will be false positives, and even worse, there might be things that it didn't manage to detect, which you want to then perform manually. So just because you don't see any vulnerabilities in your reports does not mean that there is none on the actual website. You want to always combine automated web application scanning with manual web application scanning. Alright, that would be about it. Now let us move on to another tool which we can use for web application scanning. Welcome back. Now let's take a look at another very useful tool which I personally use for web server or web application scanning. This tool is called Nikto. It is an open source web server scanner that focuses on identifying security vulnerabilities, outdated software, and misconfigurations in web servers. It will scan for over 6,000 vulnerabilities and configuration issues. It will also check for any known vulnerabilities that it has in its own database, and it can also perform TLS checks. And the good thing is it's already pre-installed in Kali Linux, so you can simply check the version by typing nikto-version, right? And it will give you the version of the current Nikto tool on my Kali Linux. Now to run it, it is rather simple. You can type nikto-h for host and then the target machine. So in this case, let's say I'm running against Metasploitable 3, right? So nikto-h, and I'm running it on my Metasploitable 3, and this is all I need to do in order to run the scan. It's quite simple to use. Now, the downside is that it might take a little longer than Zap proxy to finish, and another downside is that it is not really user friendly, and by that I mean it doesn't have a graphical user interface. Rather, it will output all of its results right here on the terminal. So we can already see some information. We get a target IP, which we already knew, the port that it is scanning on, and here are the results of the scan. Now, some of these will be identified vulnerabilities, and some of these will be just informational for you to check. Let's wait for the scan to finish to read through the results. Alright, Nikto has finished, and as with previous tool, which was Zap proxy, it didn't retrieve much information back. So what we want to do is we want to test it on a different machine as well. Now we do get some information, such as for example server, which is Microsoft. We get some type of headers which are not set, which could be set or should be set, and some other informational output such as no CGI directories found, it doesn't seem like a complete scan, right? Now, it might be due to Metasploitable. It also could be you want to always pay attention to which target port you're scanning, so maybe the web application is not on port 80, maybe it's on port 8080. You never know, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do as in last lecture, I'm just going to run it on my router instead and see what we get outputted. So on the router, we get even less information. We get server, which type of server it is. So it is a CTE Corp because this is a router. We also get some header information, which should be set. And that's pretty much about it. Now, right here, I ran the command where I changed the port for Metasploitable. So notice the difference of the scan. This is our Metasploitable scan on port 80. But we never really tried port 8080, which might also host some web application. And down here, port 8080, as we can see right here, no banner retrieved for the server, but here is the output. And we can see there is quite a lot of it, or at least 4 to 5 times more than on port 80. We can see some vulnerabilities already. Bad Blue server is vulnerable to multiple remote exploits. Let's go up here. Now, this is a little bit harder to read, but you will get used to it once you start using Nikto. We can see SAM backup is successfully retrieved, and you can read through all of this and see which vulnerabilities it managed to discover. We can see even that VMware ESX is vulnerable to a directory traversal attack, and it gives us a reference to read more about that specific attack right here, in case we want to pursue it and see whether it works on our target. Okay, awesome. So what does this mean? Well, it just means that once you use Nikto, make sure to specify the exact port where the web application is. Otherwise, you might not get any results back, and there might be vulnerabilities running on a web application from a different port. Nonetheless, that would be it about Nikto. As usual, if you want to read more about it, you can run the help menu or the manual command. Remember the manual command? It will open all the possible things that you can do with Nikto. Okay, awesome. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next lecture.